Alright, so we're gonna read a little bit of this book, The Seven, to help build my vocabulary, to improve my reading, and to train and strengthen my brain. So let's turn to page to 7. Prologue. Madeline, then. The 12th of April, 11:33 a.m. Madeline Farmer was on the verge of throwing up. The stench was unbearable, sour and cloying. It spread like poisonous gas from the center of the theater, where the sound and light desk were located. For a few hours now, the area had become a makeshift restroom. The waist-high screens that usually concealed the technical desk from the audience were all that separated users from public view. But it was either go there or soil themselves where they sat. Trying not to breathe through her nose, Madeline distracted herself from the foul smell by trying to regain the feeling in her feet. They'd been strapped into high-heeled sandals for almost 16 hours and were numb. She flexed the muscles in her legs, stretched out in front of her and encased in $4,000 worth of Versace silk. But still, the pins and needles didn't ease. She couldn't risk moving any more than that, though, because Nye had ordered everyone to sit still and be quiet or else. The last person who defied his instructions was still convulsing in the corner. She grew teary again, but blinked quickly to stop herself crying. Emotion was like catnip for Nye and his followers, and showing any fear or distress ran the risk of triggering further violent outbursts. So instead of crying, she counted backwards from 100, like her therapist had taught her, but her body trembling with the effort of trying to calm down. Eventually, mercifully, her distress began to abate, and around the 54 mark, she exhaled, grateful that neither Nye nor any of the bastards doing his bidding had seen her distress. The time to cry and break and process would be later, once they were out of this hellhole and safe. For now, her focus had to be on staying calm and staying alive. Another half hour passed in silence until a lone voice ranged out. Madeline looked up, startled. They'd been sitting so quietly that the interruption rattled her, spiking the adrenaline already coursing through her. She wasn't the only one. Others looked up fearfully too. Was something about to start up again? Or had the cops finally done what they should have hours ago and stormed the building? Adeline didn't understand what was taking them so long. She was aware the British police didn't carry guns like the cops back home in LA, but the delay in rescuing them made no sense. As far as she could tell, there wasn't even a negotiation going on. What were the authorities so scared of? This wasn't like the last time, when Nye had hundreds of people helping him barricade in. She counted 20 people inside the theater alongside him. Tops. But that lone voice was simply someone on the other side of the auditorium needing the toilet. Nausea rose in her again. There were functioning bathrooms in the foyer, but they weren't allowed to use them after Nye had realized that taking the guests out one at a time diluted his group's presence in the auditorium. 2 male guests had already tried to take advantage, attempting to take out one young woman on her own. Both men had been badly beaten by her male companions for their trouble. After that, the foyer was declared out of bounds, and the group set up the toilet area by the console desk under Nye's instructions. Patrick Nye. If she hadn't seen him with her own eyes, she'd never believe it. The infamous cult leader everyone thought had been killed trying to escape the FBI was back from the dead. God only knew how he'd end up in London, but here he was, living, breathing, and holding them hostage while still spouting the same bullshit theories about wealth and greed that had led to his demise in the first place. If she wasn't so scared of what he might do, she'd tell him everything he stood for was a joke. She heard more convincing arguments that Santa Claus existed, but she felt powerless in his presence. Her status as the world's highest paid actress counted for nothing. Not that it was in her nature to milk it. Stars who pulled that "don't you know who I am" crap revolted her. But Nye didn't care who she was as an individual. He didn't care about any of them. They were simply his means to an end. The guest needing the toilet was Samuel, Dame Cynthia's dear assistant. He looked like he aged decades in the few hours since they were sitting on top of the table together. His devastation clear to see. None of this was his fault, but she knew he'd blame himself regardless. He planned tonight's events with Dame Cynthia's grandson, Matthew, and between them they convinced many film industry names, Madeline included, to fly to London to celebrate her career. A career now forever tainted by what Nye was putting her guests through. As Samuel drew level with her, another voice rang out this time from behind the double doors that led into the foyer. Madeline and Samuel locked gazes, their expressions mirroring their mutual terror. Then the doors bust open and one of Nye's followers came running in. Without the rifle he'd previously been holding, he was still wearing the all-white waiter's uniform he'd acquired to infiltrate the event, and the front of his shirt was speckled with someone else's blood. "They've escaped," the man yelled. Clearly panicked, I couldn't stop them. They got out and the police are outside. Madeline's heart poured at the thought of rescue, and she scrambled to her feet, using the wall behind her for support. Ripping her gown in her haste, it was over. They were saved. Others rose to their feet too, patently thinking the same, and a swell of chatter now filled the previously silent auditorium. Nye's followers grew agitated seeing the guests mobilize, shouting at them to sit down again. But the man himself, gazing down at the auditorium from the stage, seemed unperturbed. "The guests will walk out first," he said, raising his voice above the clamor. "We will follow them." Relief spread through the theater, but Nye's followers looked bewildered. The one Madeline had heard the others refer to as Snow White on account of his pure white hair, an ironic nickname given the particularly vicious streak he displayed, rushed up to him. "You promised we'd get out of this alive," he cried. "If we go out there now, they'll shoot us." "No, they won't," said Nye calmly. "Trust me." He had them line up next to the doors, relieved though she was that freedom was imminent. Instincts told Madeline to hang back, where it might be safer. She hid herself within the crowd next to Samuel, but Nye sought her out anyway, shoving people aside to reach her. He forcefully grabbed her arm so she couldn't pull away. He had the cold, flat eyes of a shark. "You're going first, Miss Farmer," he said. "The public will want to see the most famous person here up close." Madeline, no. Is it Madeline? Nah. Madeline knew that there was no point fighting him this close to escaping. She walked out to the front as instructed. When Nye gave the word, she stepped into the foyer, trembling with apprehension. Sunlight streamed through the floor, two ceiling windows at the front of the theater, blurring her vision after the dimness of the windowless auditorium. But as she blinked furiously to adjust, she could also see the windows were lit up with flashing blue lights, and there was a police cordon in the streets outside. Dozens of officers were poised behind it, guns raised. Her face crumpled. Salvation was a few meters away. Now, finally, she could cry. The rest of the hostages filled, filled out the auditorium behind her, but were soon jostling for space in the much smaller foyer. Madeline didn't know whether to keep going until they were outside, so she looked over her shoulder to search out Nye for his next instruction, fearful of what might happen if she proceeded incorrectly. She couldn't make him out among the swell of people, though. Then, with a start, she realized she could see any of them. She couldn't see any of them. She looked wildly from side to side, but there was no sign. Nye and his followers had disappeared. "They're gone," she shrieked. "Oh my God, they're gone." Her yells stirred the crowd, and people began to shove past her to reach the exit first, tripping over themselves and each other in the process. Madeline, unsteady on her heels, fell backwards onto the floor. She tried to get up, but someone's foot landed heavily on her stomach, forcing her down again. Then someone else trod on her, then another, one foot after the next, as she howled in agony. Just as she was on the point of passing out, the crowd suddenly stopped surging forward. Someone reached down and tried to pull Madeline up, which made her scream again, her abdomen burning as though it had been ripped open. Then over the commotion, she heard a woman near her say, "Why won't the doors open?" Seconds later, the first bomb went off. "15 months later." Chapter 1. Eve. Now. Eve Wren paid scant attention to the squalling rain coming down at an angle, holding her umbrella tight and low in her left hand as she hurried through the crowds of commuters walking to work. With her right hand, she scrolled the article on her phone, her frown deepening as each new paragraph revealed itself. By the time she'd reached the last line, her Monday morning outlook had gone from fairly middling to angry and despondent. Crossing at the next junction, she stuffed her phone back into her bag, wishing she hadn't bothered to check it at all. Until this morning, she managed to push the article's impending publication from her mind, until a reminder notification she'd forgotten to delete pinged just as she was emerging from St. James Park's tube station for the last part of her commute. The article, posted on a popular legal affairs website, was a rundown of London's new female criminal defense solicitors. Under 30, and Eve was supposed to be on the list. She'd been nominated for the accolade by her managing partner at a respected city law firm, and the website had got as far as interviewing her. And even taking her photograph, until her unexpected sacking saw her dropped from the article's lineup. Worse still, it wasn't even her mistake that got her fired. She'd been preparing a case for court when she'd spotted that a senior partner, also her line manager, had made a serious error that she couldn't have had made a serious error that could have resulted in the client having grounds to sue them for a failure to advise. Eve pointed out the mistake, but her colleague refused to admit it was his or rectify it. So she went over his head to report it to the managing partner. She was proctoring the client and the firm. Instead, doing the right thing blew up in her face. The managing partner took her colleague's side, agreeing that the error must have been Eve's in the first place, that she was trying to pass the buck. Because she'd been there less than 2 years, they were legally able to dismiss her without cause. To add insult to injury, the website then asked the managing partner to put someone else forward to replace her in the article, So it was her colleague's name and becoming smile. Oh, and beaming smile. Eve had just seen where hers shouldn't have been. Where hers should have been. Damn. Rounding the corner into the next street, she grumpily sidestepped a fellow commuter fighting in vain to keep her own umbrella from turning inside out. The woman's mid-length tea dress and flat sandals, normal attire for July, were both soaked through by the unseasonal downpour. She glanced up as Eve passed, taking in her black trouser suit and block-heeled courts that were as comfortable to walk in as trainers, then looked away to resume her battle against the elements. Eve didn't do summary, not even when it was heat wave temperatures. And despite the dress code at the Crown Prosecution Service, where she now worked, being more relaxed than at her previous employer, she joked to her friends that the Capri trouser suit, a designer, look how well you're doing splurge, would be her armor against self-doubt when she moved from the Midlands to London. All right, so that's ooh, I went over the 15-minute timer. That's 16 minutes of reading this book. I'm gonna return this book and get a different one.